Welcome to Jays from Home, Dr. Paul Semendinger. This is a great honor to meet you for the very first time. Let's, I guess, start out with just maybe give us a background on yourself as a baseball fan and I guess as an author as well.
Sure. Hey, it's great to be here, Matt, and I'm glad you invited me onto your program. It's always an honor to have an opportunity to talk with great people like yourself. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, yep, I became a baseball fan in 1977. I became a Yankees fan, and my favorite story about that was the World Series in 1977. The Yankees, of course, were playing the Dodgers. I was 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom and dad were both teachers. My dad had back to school night. And so I was watching the game with my mom. And I was a little kid, and there was school the next day, obviously. And my dad came home, and it was somewhat late. And he said, "We got to get Paulie to bed." And my mom said, "Let him stay up. The Yankees are about to win the World Series." So my mom was the one who advocated. My dad's the biggest Yankee or biggest baseball fan in the world. He's actually a Red Sox fan.
Oh, boy.
But it was my mom who advocated for me to get to stay up and watch the Yankees win. And after Reggie hit the third home run and then the Yankees all swarmed down the field, and well, the fans swarmed down the field, I had tears coming down my face. And they were the first time I ever knew about tears of joy. I was just so happy for the Yankees.
Yeah.
And after that, they hooked me. So, and, you know, I grew up, I became a school teacher, and then I became a school administrator. I was a principal for 24 years, and I just retired at the end of last year so I could spend more time doing other great things. I had a great and fantastic career. And, you know, now I'm a writer, and I've been a writer for a while. I've written a wonderful novel. It's called Scattering the Ashes. Won a number of awards. There's a lot of baseball in that story. Then I wrote a Yankees book called The Least Among Them, which came out last year.
That sounded like a really good, interesting book when I was reading your bio and everything. Like, I guess it's just about all the Yankees who only appeared in one game, I think it was.
Yes, it was. Yeah. So a totally unique look at the Yankees. And then I took each player and I extrapolated different stories based upon something that happened in their game to tell a bigger picture about the history of history of baseball or history of the Yankees. And as you know, I've just finished my work with Roy White, former Yankee left fielder, one of the Yankee greats, and wrote his autobiography with him. And that's coming out in April. It's called From Compton to the Bronx.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing that in print. April 11th, I think, is the date that at least Amazon is telling me. It's fun.
Yes.
It's funny, like your baseball kind of journey started out with the World Series, as did mine. When I was 12 years old, watching the Blue Jays win their first World Series, that's kind of like when my eyes opened to the baseball world. So I think that's how it works for most kids.
I just wrote something like that. I have a Yankee site called Start Spreading the News, and you know, when you're a Yankees fan and you haven't won a World Series since 2009, you know, you start to bemoan the fact that the Yankees aren't winning World Series every year. Mm-hmm. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but basically I made the point that most of us become fans when the team wins. That's usually everybody's story, right? Like I fell in love with the team when they were winning the World Series. And my worry is the Yankees could be losing out on a generation of fans if they don't start winning.
Well, maybe Aaron Judge's milestone season kind of caught the eyes of lots of youngsters. But I want to ask you about Roy White. That's why you're here. Why Roy White?
Oh, that's a great question. Roy White was one of the great Yankees, and he came up in the mid-'60s. His first year in the major leagues was 1965. That was the first year that the Yankees dynasty was over. Played with the Yankees through 1979, so he was the only player who was a Yankee for the entire decade of the 1970s. Finally was on those great Yankee teams when I was a kid. Funny story about Roy White is I became a Yankees fan, I think primarily because these two older teenage kids across the street, Italian boys who were very cool, were big Yankee fans, and they influenced me a lot. If I grew up during the age of Happy Days. And these two boys were like Fonzie. They were the coolest guys around, and they lived right by me. And their favorite player was Roy White. My sister's older than me, so she then immediately gravitated to Roy White. So my favorite player became Greg Nettles. But I've always had an admiration, obviously, of Roy White, one of the great Yankees. And he had never had his autobiography written. Nobody had ever written his autobiography. And the truth of the matter is he'd been approached many times by the New York beat writers and big time sports writers and things like that. But, you know, those guys wanted to write a book and have Roy White tell all the dirty, dark secrets, right? Like, tell us about George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin and Reggie. Tell us, you know, that's what people seem to want. And I don't think Roy White ever wanted to write that kind of book. So I approached him and said, I'll write your story the way you want it told. It's your book. It's your autobiography. So if you want to tell stories, you can tell stories. And if you'd rather not tell stories, then you don't have to. Like, it's going to be your story told the way you want it to be told. And there's no need for us. I'm not looking to be the type of author who digs up dirt and tells stories outside of school. And I think he appreciated that. And that's how we sort of came together. And that's what we did.
Yeah. And he really was kind of an anchor amongst just a lot of different eras of Yankees baseball, and he got to see and witness just everything. He's the storyteller of the Yankees for a generation.
Correct, and a beloved player by the fans. As you know, when you read the book, I had ancillary chapters from other people who worked with him as players or executives, and Ray Negron, who's a Yankee executive, talks about growing up how he was the guy that all the kids in the neighborhood looked up to. Everybody wanted to be Roy White. So, right, he was, and he is the only guy, as I say, who played from the mid 60s and then throughout the entire decade of the 70s as a Yankee. So he had a perspective of Yankees history that no one else has or had.
Yeah, it's true. Now, you mentioned a lot of teammates and former key figures in his life writing chapters in the book. Why was it important to share their perspective?
As an author, I thought it would make the book much more interesting and just be a little bit different. Like I said before, with The Least Among Them, I always, at the end of each chapter, I told a different story about baseball. I'm writing a book about running right now. And I think it's just sort of my style. I have ancillary chapters about things that relate to running that don't necessarily fit into the general narrative of the story that I'm writing. So I just think it's a nice approach. It sort of breaks up the flow in a way, but I think it adds to the flow. Like, this is what I saw, and this is what somebody else saw while they were playing alongside of me. And I just think it also helps tell the full, complete picture of who Roy White was as a baseball player and as a human being. Yeah,
and it also just gives you another angle as to what people were seeing. Now, honestly, I really, being a Blue Jays fan, a Canadian, I was not into Yankees history and stuff growing up, but so I didn't really know too much about Roy White. But would you say that he's maybe the most underrated Yankee?
I think he would have to be in the conversation, and he probably is the most underrated Yankee. And in the back of the book, you saw that there's an appendix, and in that appendix, it shows where he lists and where he falls among the all-time Yankee greats in so many different categories. And, you know, the Yankees have this thing out in the outfield called Monument Park where they honor the great ball players, and Roy White isn't out there yet, and it makes no sense. Last summer they retired Paul O'Neill's number. No one's saying they need to retire Roy White's number, but Roy White's not even in Monument Park, and he was a Yankee. He meant, I would argue, much more to the Yankees, and he had a much more impressive Yankee career than Paul O'Neill, and yet he's often forgotten about. And so one of my hopes with the book is that it brings Roy White's name back out there, and maybe the Yankees do the right thing and put him in Monument Park.
Yeah, I hope so too. Why do you think the Yankees have, for lack of a better word, maybe just overlooked Roy White?
I think that's a great question. When Roy White came up, the great Yankees of the 60s were still there. So Mickey Mantle was there, Roger Maris was there, Whitey Ford was there, Elston Howard was there. I mean, so when he first came up, he was overshadowed by giants of Yankees history. And then once he really started coming into his own, the great Yankee became Thurman Munson. And then the Yankees went out and they got big time guys who were very, there's a lot of personality, shall we say, like Catfish Hunter and Reggie Jackson and Goose Gossage. And, Billy Martin was a larger than life figure. And those guys got all the attention. And Roy White, along with other players like Willie Randolph and Chris Chambliss, among others, were more quiet guys in the background, and they didn't involve themselves in the trying to get on the back page of the Daily News and on the Post and that stuff. They stayed clear of the Yankee controversy. And so because of that, I think obviously people didn't read about him in the papers as much as they did guys like Reggie. And he's also a very classy guy. So he was never the guy who was looking to get into the newspaper or to tell secrets and to be that controversial figure. And then as time goes on, people tend to forget. And bluntly, I think the reason the Yankees do these various things all the time, like retire players' numbers and such, is because it's a marketing thing. Like, hey, everybody loves Paul O'Neill. They still remember Paul O'Neill. Let's have a Paul O'Neill day. We can get a lot of people into the stands and make some money. To be honest, I don't know how much a Roy White day would help fill Yankee Stadium. My favorite player was Greg Nettles. As I said before, he was the third baseman, and he's not in Monument Park. The Yankees don't even have a third baseman in Monument Park. It makes no sense. And Nettles was the greatest third baseman. And as great as Nettles was, and he might one day be in the Hall of Fame, I don't think Greg Nettles would fill the stadium the way a recent guy like Mariano Rivera or Paul O'Neill or Tino Martinez or Derek Jeter would, because they're just too many years removed, 40 years, and people tend to forget. So I think that's part of the reason. And I think part of the reason is probably the Yankees don't necessarily value those teams as much as they should, because you haven't seen a whole lot of events for those guys. And the shame of it is they're all getting old. They're in the mid 70s at this point. And it'd be nice for them to get recognized while they can still appreciate it.
Yeah, it would be the perfect time to do it for sure, especially now that the COVID is loosening and everything, and people are getting out there more. I want to go back to the beginning of his I guess baseball career, even before it started. You mentioned in the title even from Compton to the Bronx. What made Compton such a hotbed for baseball talent?
Wasn't that amazing? As you read the book, he played with so many future major leaguers, including a teammate, Reggie Smith, who he then played against in the World Series. I asked him that, and he played against a couple guys who ended up in the NFL. The one year he played football in high school. I think there's a great book called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. When I was a principal, I read that book, and then I bought it for my entire staff, and we spent an entire school year going through that book chapter by chapter. One of the things they talk about in that book, have you read it by any chance?
No.
All right. So one of the things they talk about in that book is this idea of hotbeds, where all of a sudden, for whatever reason, places become areas where people just seem to all come out of a same type of place, all doing great things and be having these same skill sets. And I think there's something to the idea of when there's greatness around, it brings out the greatness in other people. And if you're playing baseball against a lot of great kids who have a lot of talent, they're going to bring out the talent in you. And if you don't have that talent, you're not going to last in that league. And then that's probably going to also influence scouts and other people to go, there's a lot of good players playing in that area, and they're going to come down. Also, it's, they could play year round. The weather was great and played baseball a lot. Roy White grew up in a family that did not have a whole lot. But one of the things he does mention in the book is the fact that his mom let him play ball. She didn't say, go get a job. He did have jobs, of course, but she didn't force him to do things that would have taken him away from playing baseball.
And she encouraged her kids to get into the arts. I think you mentioned his sisters in the arts as well. And I think his attitude in life and just how he keeps his head down and just is such a stand-up kind of guy starts from his mother.
That's a great point. Yeah, it sounds that way. And I'm telling you, they say that heroes have clay feet, and a lot of people have a chance to meet the people they looked up to in their lives, and they get disappointed. I have to tell you, I've worked with Roy White for a year now, and there's no clay feet there. In fact, his feet have become more and more solid each time I meet him and each time I talk to him. This is just a guy who was a great baseball player, but he's a better human being. Just salt of the earth, kind, generous, and he is exactly what he was portrayed with in the media as the classy Yankee, the guy who was kind and understanding and a human rather than just a baseball player. So he is that type of person. He's just a good human being.
And I think also in the book, there people start to compare him to Lou Gehrig, and I think that's an apt comparison as well. Like Lou Gehrig never really was known until his disease was out and in the forefront, and his streak was coming out. But they carry themselves in the same stature. You say in the book, it comes up a lot.
Yes. That was said by Ray Negron in the book, and
right.
I can't disagree with that. Lou Gehrig's whole career, he was overshadowed. He's overshadowed by Babe Ruth, and then Ruth goes away, I guess, in 34 or 33, and in 36, Joe DiMaggio arrives, and he becomes the big focus. And Lou Gehrig, sadly, becomes famous because of the fact that he obviously gets ALS and has that whole tragic situation regarding his life.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's too bad he wasn't the pre-ALS wasn't highlighted more. Now we're talking early career and everything. I feel like Roy's career was kind of affected with his kind of stops and starts. Like there was the military time, and the players' strike, and even I think his shoulder injury happened early on in his career. So there was lots of He had a bumpy road to start his career. Could he have been a better player if he had more playing time early on?
That's a great question. He did have a lot of bumps and starts. One of the things that I loved about talking, and I still do, about talking with Roy White is, here's a guy, and whenever we'd go out, most often somebody would recognize him and come over and be like, "Hey, Mr. White, how are you? I just want to say, all people my age or older, you were the best. Love you. Just got to shake your hand." And then they'd leave. and like, you'd think if your whole life is spent with people coming up and telling you how great you are all the time, you might get a big head, right?
Yeah.
Like, look at me. Instead, and I don't know if you noticed this while reading, like every time he tells something great that happens, he then basically almost in the next sentence says how, well, it wasn't that great. Or, I was leading the team in home runs and then I stopped hitting home runs and things like that. There's this modesty, this humbleness that resonates throughout. So, yeah, the Yankees moved him up and down. He would get off to a great start. And then one of the problems he had early in his career, we were just talking about this a second ago, is when he was leading the team in home runs, he then started to think like, hey, I'm a home run hitter. Mm-hmm. And then he just started to try to jank the ball out of Yankee Stadium. And what it resulted in him is getting into bad habits. And I think he hit one home run the rest of the year. And I think that was part of the learning process. He figured out, this is the way I'm playing and this is why I'm doing poorly. So could he have been better? I think we probably all look back and say we could have been better, but I think it's the journey that makes us who we are.
Yeah, and he had a pretty kind of steady career up until, I would say, he crossed paths with Billy Martin. So I wonder, why do you think Billy Martin just wouldn't start Roy more often? He never really gave him a consistent playing time. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that I couldn't answer because I can't get into Billy Martin's head. I think Billy Martin.
Nobody can.
Yes, indeed. Growing up as a kid, these guys were all superheroes, right? Like I watched the Super Friends on TV, and then I watched the Yankees, right? Like the Yankees were superheroes. Which, to go off on a little tangent, when Thurman Munson died in 1979, I had a hard time processing that as an 11-year-old. Like, no, but a Yankee can't die. I've got his poster on my wall. Thurman Munson's like Superman. Mm-hmm. Like, heroes like that don't die. Somehow, as an 11-year-old, I could understand that Babe Ruth was dead because he was a long time ago. Like, but these are the guys that are playing today. Yeah. And I remember being a kid at that time, not quite understanding why the Yankee manager was getting fired and rehired, and there was all this controversy. Like, I thought you should be a good guy if you were a Yankee. I don't understand what all this was about, trying to process all that. I think Billy Martin had his own way, and I think part of what Billy Martin wanted were more charismatic players, like somebody who was going to be exciting. And Roy White wasn't necessarily, he did a lot of things that were exciting. He hit extra base hits. He stole bases. He leaped over the fence to catch home runs. He scored a lot of runs, but he also did things that weren't exciting. Like he walked a lot. He took the extra base on a base hit to right field, which could be exciting, but if it's just perfunctory, it's not all that exciting. Led the league in sacrifice flies one year. Led the league without making an error one year. And I don't know if that necessarily is the type of thing that gets people as excited as the 3 home runs in one World Series game like Reggie did, and Greg Nettles diving all over the place, and the 78 World Series. I think Roy White was more the type of player that went out, did his job quietly, and then went home. And maybe Billy Martin, just sometimes when that happens, like the greatness that's happening in front of you, you don't notice because you're distracted by so many other things.
Now, do you think if he had a different manager other than Billy Martin, that maybe he wouldn't have ended his career and played in Japan?
Again, that's a great question, because Billy Martin didn't really play him much that last year.
No.
And then he went to play in the Dominican or Puerto Rico, I forget. He went to play winter ball. And it was while he was there that he was scouted by the Yomiuri Giants and was then offered a contract to play with them. The Yankees had offered him a contract, but it wasn't how do you say it wasn't really a fair offer. It was kind of a lowball offer. And
it was below him.
And so he was less inclined to take that deal. And then he got this great offer to go to Japan. And it was Roy White's a man of the world, too. He's very learned. He read a lot. You talk to players who played with him. They talk about the fact that he had a book in his hand oftentimes. And I think there was a sense in his life that maybe it was time for a change. And the opportunity to go to a different country and experience that culture, I think, was very appealing to him. And so, if he had played all the time in 79 and if he had had a typical Roy White year, he probably would have been offered a bigger contract for 1980. He would have been more of a central figure on the Yankees. And so he probably wouldn't have gone to Japan. But I don't think he regrets ever going to Japan.
Yeah. And I think his what sent him to Japan is what kept him from the Yankees, and that's his dignity. Like and that's also what ended up sending him into coaching, because he didn't feel like that Angels contract that was offered to him was dignified, or at least the way they wanted to I guess announce it. How big of a shock do you think that it was transitioning from the Yankees to the Giants, the Yomiuri Giants?
Yes, I think it was a big shock and a big change. Japan, especially back then, did baseball a lot differently than we do in America. Their spring training, if you call it that, was much more rigorous. They worked you extremely hard, and they punished you physically, because they didn't want you to lose a game because of not being in shape. And one of the things that speaks to Roy White's character was once he went to Japan, the teammates basically said to him, you don't have to do all these exercises and these routines. You're a Yankee. You're a world champion. And he did everything that his teammates were expected to do, which it made him part of the team very quickly. And they respected him for that. So I think I lost your original question.
Well, just the culture shock between the two.
So, but I think there weren't a whole lot of baseball players going to Japan at the time.
Yeah, and they had a maximum of 2 per team, I think you said in the book, too, right?
That is correct. Yep. Yeah. And so, you had to learn a brand new culture and figure out how to live there. But he did quickly. He had a translator who he worked with, who was named Ichiro, which is kind of fun. and he slowly became part of what Japan's culture was. And again, everything I've talked to him about was he talks about Japan in glowing terms. So.
And to bring it back full circle, if it wasn't for Japan scouting him, he would never have had the chance to scout Matsui when they were looking to sign him. And so he, to bring it back full circle, he played a role bringing in one of the most important players of a new generation.
That's correct. And he and Matsui are the only 2 guys to ever win a World Series with the greatest Japanese team, the Yomiuri Giants, and the greatest American team, the Yankees.
World Series trophies wise. I don't know about
correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, then that's great. I really enjoyed the book. I'm looking forward to when it comes out. I have a few more questions non-related to Roy White though for you if you have some time.
Oh, I have as much time as you'd like.
Oh, perfect. Well, now we're still in the off season. How did you feel about Aaron Judge, the Aaron Judge saga, him signing with the Yankees? How did that? How nervous were you?
During the season, there were times when I was convinced he wouldn't come back. The Yankees, if you recall, had a great first half last year, and the second half, for a lot of it, was a disaster. They couldn't do anything right from the middle of July on. They just lost and lost and lost. But I think, as he saw the love that transpired during that home run chase, and even though the Yankees lost in the playoffs, the idea became that he was much too important to the Yankees, that it seemed pretty obvious that they were going to bring him back. And if they didn't bring him back, it was going to be a disaster. Yeah. There hasn't been many times the Yankees haven't brought back their star player. I take issue with the Yankees for being a little too reticent, a little too lackadaisical. They let some big time players go. I'll probably never forgive them from not signing Bryce Harper. Boy, did I want him. But it's not often that the great Yankees leave. Robinson Cano left. Andy Pettitte left for a couple of years. But those are the only two I can really think about who left in their prime and homegrown guys. So I don't think the Yankees had a choice. They had to bring Aaron Judge back. And I think the contract's fair. I think it's great. So, I'm absolutely thrilled.
$40 million a year is fair. Are you worried about the back end of that contract, though?
I am. My worry with the Yankees isn't that they can't afford the salary. My worry with the Yankees is that they look at the luxury tax. Now, this is a spoiled Yankee fan talking, right? Like, all I want them to do is win and go 162-0 every year and win the World Series. That's a successful season for me. Like, and Yankee fans, get a bad rap because, we haven't won since 2009. And other teams we haven't won since 1986. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how spoiled are you? But that's sort of comes with the territory, I guess. And I'm reasonable enough to know that you can't win it all the time. But my worry with the contract is just simply if the Yankees are going to make sure that they're always under the luxury tax, and Aaron Judge's contract is eating up $40 million of that salary commitment that the team can make, that could get in the way of them getting other players that could help them win. So that's my only concern.
So you're afraid that they'll become the Red Sox?
I'm afraid that they'll act like the Red Sox have the last couple of years. Yeah, and like the Rangers did when they had A-Rod in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and the Dodgers are kind of flirting with that a little bit this year. But I would say other than Judge and Carlos Rodon, it's been a relatively quiet offseason for the Yankees signings wise. What did you expect more from the shortstop? There was a lot of rumors out there about Carlos Correa going to the Mets, but was there any chance that he would come to the Yankees?
I didn't think the Yankees were going to do anything with shortstop. They haven't. They've let a lot of shortstops go by the board. A couple of years ago, I wanted them to be all in on Francisco Lindor. I thought he was the guy to get. Went to the Mets, but I didn't have any thoughts that they were going to be players last year or the year before with all those Trevor Story and Marcus Semien and Carlos Correa and Corey Seager and all those guys. I didn't think the Yankees were going to play there because they have a couple of great young prospects who are shortstops. Oswald Peraza, Anthony Volpe. These are the guys that they think are going to be the core of the next great team. And while we've all been burned waiting for the great next prospect to be great, and they don't necessarily always turn out that way. This is the way the Yankees are thinking, and I have to trust that they know what they're doing because they do. So I didn't think they were being involved in shortstop, but I'm very frustrated that they haven't addressed left field. They basically intimated that at the Judge signing, we have work to do yet. We'll get a good left fielder here. And right now they're looking at Oswald Cabrera, who's an infielder in the minor leagues and was pretty good last year, but how do you know what he's going to do? He's not really an outfielder. And Aaron Hicks, has not been very good the last few years. So I was hoping they'd go out and they'd do something to get a big time left fielder to help the team.
Maybe Brian Reynolds fills that hole somehow, but he's more of a center fielder. But it's a moving pieces the outfield can be. One more Yankees question for you, well maybe a couple more. What do you make of them hiring Brian Sabean and Omar Minaya this past week? They're two kind of not notoriously numbers guys in the past week that they've added on to their front office.
I love it. I think it's great. By and large, I think Brian Cashman's been a great general manager. I think he's done a very, very, very good job. The Yankees are always in it. But the Yankees haven't gotten to the promised land in a long time now. And, everybody, myself included, when I was a principal and a school leader for decades, we all have blind spots. And there are things that we just can't see. And we think that we know the right way, and it's not necessarily the right way. Or there could be a better way. Our way could be really effective, but there could even be a better way. And I think Brian Sabean and Omar Minaya are going to come in and challenge Brian Cashman's thinking. I think he was 100% behind bringing them in. I think that shows the mark of a great leader. A great leader is someone who wants to hear opposing perspectives and viewpoints because it's going to help the organization be better. I didn't always love it when the teachers challenged me, but I had some phenomenal teachers in my school who would sometimes come into my office and say, "Can I close the door and talk?" And I'd always be like, "Oh, no." And, they tell me like, what we're doing right now, it's not so great. Or the message you tried to give at the faculty meeting, they didn't quite understand it. Everybody's confused. And boy, you want people to say, "You're the greatest ever. You're the greatest principal we ever have. Everything you do is perfect." But that's not how you grow, right? And so while it's not fun to have somebody tell you like you could do better, you need to have people who feel comfortable to come in your office, close the door, sit down and tell you you can do better. And we need you to do better. And it made me a better principal, made me a better leader. And I think those people are going to do the same for Cashman. That doesn't mean he's not good. Doesn't mean he couldn't, but it also doesn't mean he can't be better because we all can.
Yeah, I guess Cashman kind of played that role with George Steinbrenner, so he needs someone to kind of have his ear for that. Now, do you think that the Yankees are the team to beat for the East Division champions?
It's a tough call. I think your Toronto Blue Jays are very good. They have so many good young players. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of outs in the Yankee lineup. I think people think because they led the league in runs scored, they're going to score a lot of runs. But, boy, they don't have great hitting catchers. We're not sure what's going to happen at shortstop. Josh Donaldson didn't really hit last year. We don't know who's playing left field. Giancarlo Stanton as the DH didn't hit. Harrison Bader is going to play center. Some people think that his StatCast numbers say that he's been unlucky and that he's going to thrive in Yankee Stadium. But I'm not 100% convinced. So you look at a lot of outs in the lineup. But the Yankees have a phenomenal starting pitching staff. Boy, it looks like maybe the best staff I've seen in decades, maybe ever for the Yankees. So it might be a different type of Yankee team that wins a lot of 3-2 games and 2-1 games. I think odds on, or they have to be considered one of the favorites. And if they could somehow get a lot of production out of the hitters, I think that there's no doubt about that they're going to be great. But so, yes, I would predict them right now being the favorites in the American League East.
Yeah, it's scary. Now, I'm going to bring it back to Lou Gehrig a little bit here. We were talking about him before, and also you're running. I see your bib in the background there. You, on your blog, were talking about kind of a Gehrig-type streak that you accomplished last year. You ran every day for a year. How did you do that? Why did you do that?
The why is probably something I can't answer. It was a Gehrig-like streak. I ran every day for the entire year in 2022, and that's the running book I'm writing. I'm editing it now. So basically, it's going to be the tale. Hopefully, it's very motivational of me running every day from an entire year. Like, this is what happened on January 5th. This is what happened on January 6th. But it's not just going to be I ran 3 miles. Next day, I ran 4 miles. It's more than that. It's sort of like my life, but this is how you motivate yourself over the course of a year to do something that's silly or absurd. But it's always been on my mind. Like, I wonder if I could run every day for a year. I've run 23 marathons. I used to be an ancient history teacher. That's when I started. And I taught about the ancient Greeks, and we would talk about the Battle of Marathon. I had posters in my room from marathons that kids would bring me and things like that. And in the back of my mind, I was always like, I should try that. I did 20 some odd years ago. And I ran New York, and it hooked me. It was just the most amazing thing in the world to have millions of people in New York cheering for you as you're running. It's just, it's euphoric. You think they're all there for you, even though there's 50,000 runners and they're all there for everybody but you.
Yeah.
But it feels like they're there for you. And it was euphoric. And so as you do stupid things, you think of other stupid things to do. And one of the things was I'd like to see if I could run every day for a year. Do I have it in me? And I did. So yeah, that was fun. I ran on January 1st of this year because I wanted to just keep the streak going. But I made the conscious decision on January 2nd to not run. I wrote about that on the blog because I didn't want to find myself getting into another streak and being like, ooh, well, maybe I could do it again. I didn't want to do it again. That wasn't the purpose. The purpose wasn't to run every day for the rest of my life. It was to run every day for a year. So a little bit of sanity prevailed on January 2nd, where I convinced myself, let it go. It's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm a runner too. I'm working my way up, hopefully, to a half marathon this year. I've run them before, but even getting out there, 3 times a week is tough. So good job getting out there every day for a year, and good job. I wonder if it was harder to stop running than it was to keep going.
I got to tell you, January 2nd, I'm like, well, maybe. Let me go. No, don't. So yeah, there was a lot of mental gymnastics going on that day, no doubt.
For sure, it's hard to get your mind around just starting the run. I find the first kilometer and the last kilometer, being Canadian metric, are always the hardest. Paul, thanks so much for joining me. The book is Roy White, From Compton to the Bronx, out April 11th, and you're working on a running book. I'll be interested to check that one out too, being a runner and a baseball consumer while I run, listening to podcasts. So yes, great. Thanks for joining me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Matt. This was so much fun. Thank you.